Some people would try to tell you that Manchester United are no better under Erik Ten Hag than they were under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but I think that's wrong. However, it is completely understandable how they may come to that conclusion if you look at some of the data. So what we've got on the board here is the last few seasons of expected points totals from Understat, and as we can see, Erik Ten Hag here is very much in the same ballpark as Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's first couple of seasons at the club. And the same is also true if we look at expected goal difference totals as well. In fact, Erik Ten Hag slightly worse than the first two seasons under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. But if we dig into the underlying data with a little bit more granularity, we'll see that a very different picture starts to emerge. So this is a 10-game rolling average showing you the expected goal difference for Manchester United over the last 4 seasons. And as we can see, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer does hit a fairly consistent level throughout his time. There is some dips, particularly towards the end as well, which might explain why he left. But the general idea is that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had his team producing about the same amount of expected goal difference across a 10-game average for most of his time. Now, when it comes to Erik Ten Hag, it's a completely different story because we see a lot more fluctuation in that expected goal difference as the season goes on. We can see at the beginning of the season, Manchester United start off quite poorly, but very quickly actually have an improvement. And you would think at this point, Manchester United are in a perfect position under Erik Ten Hag, but actually there is a dip mid-season. You can see it goes back into the red, but then as the season progresses, you get right to the end of the season and Manchester United are on the up again. So much more chaos in the underlying numbers when you actually break it down like this. And we can break down those numbers even further by looking at the expected goals for and the expected goals against. So the blue line here is expected goals for, and as you can see, that number is slowly trending upwards, which is a good thing. It means Manchester United are generating more and better chances. But when it comes to the defensive side of things and the expected goals against, we can see there's a lot more fluctuation in the data. So at the beginning of the season, the expected goals against are higher than the expected goals for. That's why we have a red area here, but we can see very quickly that defensive performance improves. But then again, in the middle of the season, we can see those numbers trending in the wrong direction again. That's probably a combination of a few things. The intensity of the season with a World Cup in the middle of it, and then Manchester United lose Casemiro for a long time, and also Lisandro Martinez. But as before, we can see at the end of the season, Manchester United's numbers are now trending in the right direction. And so if we look at the underlying numbers, what we actually see is that there's a lot of inconsistency in Erik Ten Hag's Manchester United. At their best under Erik Ten Hag, they've clearly been better than they were at any point under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, but there have been periods where they've performed worse as well. And this inconsistency also shows up quite interestingly in this data set from Kees van Hemmen. What Kees has done is he's taken the expected goal difference per 90 for all the teams in the Premier League this season. And what he's done is he's taken out the worst 5 performances for each team and then reassessed what the expected goal difference is. Now, obviously, when you take the 5 worst performances out of a data set, you're going to end up with a better figure, and this shows up well with Manchester United, who go from an expected goal difference per 90 of 0.45 up to an expected goal difference of 0.84. And what this shows is that Manchester United's numbers this season have been heavily skewed by their worst performances. When they're bad, they're really quite bad, but most of the time, they're actually pretty good. So why have Manchester United been so inconsistent under Erik Ten Hag? Well, I think there are tactical explanations for why this is the case, but to get to that, we first need to remind ourselves of how Manchester United played under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, Manchester United generally played a counter-attacking brand of football, and that is because of the players they had at their disposal. So they got players like Marcus Rashford, Dan James, and then a really high-volume creative passer like Bruno Fernandes. So you're going to try and get the ball to Bruno Fernandes, and then he's going to try and find the runs of Dan James and Marcus Rashford. And the idea is you score a lot of goals like this. But obviously, if the opposition are sitting out in their own half, there isn't a huge amount of space to attack. It's going to be much easier to make runs in behind if there is a behind to run into. So what you have to do is try and generate space somehow. And the way that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Manchester United tended to do that was by sitting a little bit deeper, allowing the opposition to have possession of the ball. And so what you're doing is actually creating space in behind that you can attack. And what's going to happen is you're going to allow the opposition to have the ball and you're going to force them to try and break you down. But if they don't, what you hope ends up happening is that the ball ends up at the feet of someone like Bruno Fernandes, who can then play these sprayed passes into space, and then you have the pace of Rashford and James to get in behind, try and generate goals in that manner. Now you might say, isn't that exactly what Erik Ten Hag is doing? And if you look at the data, it is true that direct attacks have been trending upwards under the Dutchman this season. And also, if you look at the personnel that are available to him, you'll see that actually there's still players who are good playing in transition. So you've got Antony and Rashford in these wide areas. And you've also got Bruno Fernandes, who's a high volume creative passer. And you've also got Eriksen and Casemiro, both of whom are very good passers of the ball as well. So they'll be able to find these wide players in transition also. But Erik Ten Hag is going to try and generate these transitional moments in a very different way to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, because rather than allowing the opposition possession of the ball and relying on turnovers to generate transitions, he actually wants much more control in possession of the ball. So what this looks like is that you're going to try and hold the ball at the back, bait the opposition forward to press you, and in so doing, what you've actually done is exactly what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was doing out of possession, which is generating space in behind here that can be attacked by your transitional players. So now the idea is that you do quick passing through the middle, get the ball into the feet of someone like Fernandes, and then you can still find these passes into space in the wide areas, into the feet of your transitional players, and you can again generate these dangerous moments. Now this has been a really fruitful way of attacking for Manchester United this season, which is one reason why they're much better in possession of the ball, but it does rely on you being able to play through an opposition press. But the issue is that this is quite a risky way of playing, because it's all well and good if you can play the ball through the opposition press and get the ball into the feet of one of your creative passers who can then start a transition, but if it goes wrong, then you may end up turning the ball over to the opposition, who can then have a good chance of scoring themselves. And this happened a number of times this season for Manchester United, messing up in the build-up and resulting in goals. Now this partially explains why Manchester United's numbers have been so inconsistent this season, because when this attacking approach works, you're actually able to generate a number of chances, but when it goes wrong, you're actually giving up very dangerous chances to the opposition as well. But it's not just the in-possession tactics that are adding to this inconsistency. We can also see it in the out-of-possession tactics as well. So on the board in front of me, I've just got a 10-game rolling average for Manchester United's PPDA for the last few seasons. Now, PPDA is just a metric which shows you the pressing intensity of a team. What it actually shows you is how many passes you're allowing the opposition to make before you make a defensive action. And so obviously, the fewer passes that you're allowing before you make a pressing action, the more intense your press is going to be. So as we can see here, under Erik Ten Hag, Manchester United have reduced the PPDA for their team. That means their pressing has become more intense, and you can see actually it's probably a little bit more intense than it has been at any point under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, although it is fairly similar on average, as you can see. But as a metric, PPDA only shows the frequency of a team's pressing. It doesn't show where on the pitch it's taking place. And this is another area where you can distinguish Erik Ten Hag from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, because on the board in front of me here, I've got a map which shows that Manchester United are winning the ball back high up the field. So this is the final third of the opposition. And as you can see, all of these circles are challenges that are made by Manchester United players. All of the orange circles are the ones where they've actually turned the ball over and resulted in an attacking play. And there is one somewhere, green one here, that actually ended in a goal. And as we can see, 1 in 5 of these high regains actually ended up with a shot. So Manchester United actually using their out of possession play to be a very dangerous attacking team. And interestingly enough, if we look across the last few seasons, we can see that Erik Ten Hag's Manchester United are winning the ball higher up the pitch with a greater frequency than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's Manchester United. So how are they doing this? Well, let's imagine that the opposition here are building up from the back and Manchester United are going to try and stop them. Usually what we'll see is Manchester United actually being fairly player for player across the field. So we'll see the fullbacks on the wide players here. The central midfielders can match up usually quite nicely against a 3-man midfield. Often what you'll see is the centre forward being tracked by 2 players, just to make sure that you're giving extra coverage on that player. And that means that you're going to have a discrepancy in the front line. So in this instance, we've got a front 3 against a back 4. Now what's going to happen is that whenever the ball is played out from the back, is Manchester United are going to try and force the opposition onto one side of the field. So let's imagine the goalkeeper plays the ball out here to the centre back. What we'll see is this front 3 shift around. So Anthony will come onto the fullback, Martial will come across to press the ball carrier, and then what we'll see is the far-sided wide player coming across to just cover this centre-back as well. And the idea then is that you keep everyone tightly man-marked on this side of the field, and the only option that they'll have then is to play it long, and you would hope that because you've got the overload in the back line here, you're going to win the ball back and then you can start your attack. But what you may notice is that actually does leave a far-side weakness here. Now it is worth noting that a lot of teams might push their fullback up onto this player to make sure that weakness doesn't exist, but all you're doing then is moving the weakness to another place. Now what you might do to solve that is move one of your centre-backs across and have the other centre-back 1v1 against the forward, but then what you've done is you've stopped having this overload in the final line, so if the ball does come in, you've now got 1v1 against the remaining players in that front line, so it's a little bit more risky, and Erik Ten Hag has shown this season he doesn't seem to like it. And there's a sense in which Manchester United are happy to allow this weakness to exist, because it actually allows them the possibility of being able to play a pressing trap in this area. So let's imagine this fullback now carries the ball forward. Manchester United can fall on the ball here, like this, around the ball, make it hard for the opposition to build up. Ideally, you win the ball back and now you're in another transitional moment. So you're actually able to benefit from having this weakness in the first place. But the problem is that when you're playing against elite teams, they can both find this weakness and really exploit it as well. So there'll be situations where Manchester United actually allow this ball carrier, the fullback, to get into these advanced areas without being challenged at all once that switch is made. And this can cause lots of problems because you can play balls in behind the fullback, or you can play the ball in behind the back line as well. So what you're doing is you're making the possibility of these teams being able to progress the ball much easier. So once again, we can see how Manchester United's tactical approach contributes to the inconsistency that we've seen in the numbers, because against weaker teams, this pressing approach can actually help Manchester United control the opposition, but also results in dangerous attacking moments as well. But against better teams, it actually results in them being even easier to break down as well. So again, when it works, it's really good. When it doesn't work, it can be quite bad. So have Manchester United improved under Erik Ten Hag? Well, I think the answer to that question is obviously yes. But as we've seen, there are elements of their in-possession play and their out-of-possession play that are contributing to making them more inconsistent. And the big question is, how do you fix those problems? Now, one way of fixing that is by bringing in better personnel. As we've already said, the big risk of their in-possession play is that they're trying to build up through opposition presses. So if you bring in better technical players, you'll not only be able to move through those presses more regularly, you also make it less likely for yourselves to turn the ball over and result in these goals. And at the other end of the pitch, you can improve your out-of-possession play by bringing in players who are better pressers. But there's a deeper problem here, and that is that there is an intrinsic level of inconsistency built into this play style itself. Even with better players, this is a risky out-of-possession approach and a risky in-possession approach. And so by bringing in those better players, all that you're doing is reducing the probability of those inconsistencies. And as we know, at the very top level of the game, consistency is the most important thing. We've learned that from Pep Guardiola at Manchester City. And so the bigger question becomes, how does Erik Ten Hag introduce elements of control into his approach that make Manchester United able to compete at the highest level? And this is going to be the tension which is going to dictate the rest of his time at the club.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.